Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is one of the first in a series of trainings that the Northern Colorado Continuum of Care is going to be offering. For those of you who attend our general membership meetings, we have those every other month. Anyone is welcome. We have them on the third Thursday of the month, of every other month from 9 to 11. And we've decided that on the alternate months of our, in between our general membership meetings, we're going to be offering trainings that you might find applicable to your work, or just good information for us as we're trying to address homelessness in our day-to-day work. And so this is our first one. We're going to be talking about the intersection of domestic violence and homelessness, and provide some information on basics of what domestic violence looks like and how it shows up in people who are experiencing homelessness perhaps differently than other circumstances of folks experiencing homelessness that may not be dealing with domestic violence. And then later on in the presentation, the second part, we're going to really focus on how domestic violence and those who are accessing homeless services through our coordinated entry, our CAHPS system, just some considerations for that. And so I'm going to turn it over now here in a second to Jillian Coleman and the team at Alternatives to Violence to introduce themselves. But just a quick kind of plug there. If you're just joining us here, I'd appreciate it if you would change your name on your screen to your first and last name, and ideally the agency you're with, or you can put it in the chat. And I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation for questions, and Jillian can share how she'd like that answered. But we appreciate you all joining us today. It's great. It's a great turnout. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jillian, Carrie, Sierra. We have a whole team from Alternatives to Violence here.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let me share my screen really quick. All right, does everyone see that okay? Awesome. Perfect. Well, yeah, my name is Jillian Coleman. I've been with Alternatives to Violence for about 4 years. And I will let Carrie and then Sierra introduce themselves really quick.
I am Carrie Clark. I'm the Executive Director at Alternatives to Violence, and I've been here 5 years.
Hi, my name is Sierra. I'm the Housing Case Manager with Alternatives to Violence. I've been here for about 2.5 years, but in this role coming up on a year.
Awesome. So yeah, today we're gonna, like Kelly said, the first half is gonna be for everybody, and we're gonna just start with some domestic violence basics and how that interacts with different things like substance use and homelessness. And then the second half will be specific to folks who do participate in CAHPS, so everyone else can jump off at that point if that doesn't relate to you guys. And there will be, Kelly, I do have a few built-in breaks for questions. So we can hold off for those, and that will be perfect. So we'll start with just what is domestic violence, and I will let Carrie discuss this definition first.
Great. So the way we look at it here at Alternatives to Violence is that domestic violence is a pattern of behavior in which one individual attempts to exert power and control over another individual in a current or former intimate relationship. Different states have different laws pertaining to domestic violence, and we'll get into that in just a minute. This is how we look at it from servicing our clients and people who come into Alternatives to Violence for either residential or non-residential help. We do have a shelter. The difference is a lot of people that I talk to with domestic violence is the pattern of behavior and the power and control. And that's why those are underlined. I get a lot of people who say, well, my partner was really drunk last night and pushed me down, but there's no history of control, power and control, pattern of behavior. Is it good for there ever to be any kind of physicality? No, there's not. But the way we look at it is a pattern of behavior. That being said, the state of Colorado, Jillian, can you move this slide? This is the Colorado definition: an act or threatened act of violence upon a person with whom the actor is or has been involved in an intimate relationship. Includes any other crime against a person or property, including an animal, when it is used as a method of coercion, control, punishment, intimidation, or revenge directed against a person with whom the actor is or has been in an intimate relationship. So strangely enough, in some states, they actually don't include the intimate relationship part of it. The law in Colorado is a very good law. The only thing that they don't address is the repeated pattern. And that's okay, because we'd rather be safe than sorry when it comes to law enforcement making arrests against those who have been or have acted upon in a way. The good definition is that they include coercion, control, punishment, intimidation, or revenge. I have had law enforcement officials locally say to me, well, we couldn't make that arrest because there was no physical violence. Just because they're intimidating them or coercing them to do something, we can't do that. And yes, they can. So I do like to emphasize that.
We also like to include this just so that people are aware, this is what law enforcement are looking for when they show up on scene, is those factors. And Colorado is a mandatory arrest state. So if they do see all of these elements and think that that's probable cause that domestic violence has taken place, then they do need to make some sort of arrest. And sometimes if they can't figure out which party's at fault, they'll just do a dual arrest and arrest both parties and then kind of figure it out, the details out later. And like Carrie said, this is specific to intimate partner relationships. So it doesn't include things like familial relationships or familial violence, although we still work with those folks as well.
Yeah, the other point that I want to make in the cross section with this, with the homeless population, is if there is an arrest made for domestic violence, and Kelly's probably cringing right here because she's worked in this so long. I do want to emphasize that you cannot be arrested in the state of Colorado directly for domestic violence. It is a sentence enhancer in the state of Colorado. So you will be arrested. The person would be arrested for something like, and that's where the physical part of it comes in, assault or things like that. And then they'll include a domestic violence enhancer. When that happens, there is an automatic restraining order put in place, protective order. So we see this a lot amongst those that we talk to who are in the homeless community, because folks, if they're not yet housed and they're staying at shelters, it becomes really a sticky situation if that's the only place folks can stay and there's a protective order against the party. So we do see a good population of folks coming in the shelter who come from the homeless population, who they may not even want that restraining order. It doesn't matter. It's an automatic protective order when somebody is arrested with a domestic violence enhancer. So they can't be in the same place. I'm going to move on to this one a little bit. This is the power and control wheel. It's a good description for those who are not familiar with domestic violence and have different perceptions on what we think of as domestic violence. This to me is the key for explaining how it works, because most people assume domestic violence is when you're getting physically abused from your partner. As you can see in this wheel, that's not the way it starts. You don't go into a relationship knowing that somebody is going to physically beat you or even exert power and control. Most people go into a relationship with somebody wooing them and loving them. Then slowly over time, we get these spokes of the wheel that are the different forms of domestic violence. And the key to it is power and control. So using intimidation, economic abuse is a big one, isolation, and Jillian will get into these forms of power and control later. But once those things start, and they start small, they go out and they start happening more often, which then leads into physical or sexual violence. And then the big one after that is post-separation abuse. So if an abused person, a victim, decides to leave a abusive relationship, whether it's by the time it gets to physical violence or if it is still in emotional or all these other spokes, post-separation abuse is the most dangerous time. So after post-separation abuse, we see a lot of times lethality or death. That's when folks really get abusers really get in the violent mode and get upset. So the wheel kind of keeps going out, but it starts in the middle and can go out. That being said, this goes in with the cycle of abuse, right? So stage one, they start with tension builds, walking on eggshells. I'm going to start stage one before the abuse of people being in love, the honeymoon stage, people getting along. Then all of a sudden things start happening where tension builds, you're feeling like you have to walk on eggshells around your abuser. Stage two is release of tension, the abuse occurs. That could be physical, that could be taking your phone and throwing it against a wall, some kind of blow up or abuse. And then the promise it'll never happen again in the I sorries. And then it goes back into the same thing again. So we refer to that as the cycle of abuse. We are used to that with clients that we see here at ATV. It happens. There are times where folks will say, he's apologizing, he's calling, I'm going to go back. The national average for leaving an abusive for good is 7 to 10 times. We do not judge here at Alternatives to Violence. All the other agencies, there's a few other on here in the area who are joining us today, are the same way. If people go back, we just give them ways, safety planning, which we'll get into later. We don't ever judge, and we always say you're welcome to come back if anything else is going.
So domestic violence is big. It's a big word, and it encompasses a lot of different kinds of violence. I would love now for everyone to put in the chat what kind of violence comes to your mind first when you hear of domestic violence, or what kind of abuse comes to mind for you guys. Physical, emotional, gaslighting. Gaslighting is a big one. Isolation, emotional, lots of physical, mental. You guys don't even need us. Yeah, these are perfect. So yeah, the big one that is popping up with most people I'm seeing is physical abuse. That is what everyone thinks of first. It's hitting, it's black eyes, it's kicking, it's restraint, throwing things, even throwing things near someone and not at them. That is physical abuse. And this can look like, it can look subtle. It can look like having a lot of bruises that are in different phases of healing, different things like that. It could be obvious, like neck braces, arm braces, things like that, but it can be pretty subtle too, especially strangulation. One note I always like to soapbox a little bit. If anyone ever tells you they've been strangled recently, please ask them to go see medical care. There are lasting effects of strangulation that can pop up a long while after the actual incident happens. So we always try to ask that just in case. It just doesn't hurt to get checked out. But yeah, physical restraint is obviously, or physical abuse is obviously the biggest thing that people think of. And the next being sexual abuse. And I'll let Carrie talk to you a little bit about that.
This type of abuse is any unwanted sexual act forced upon a victim. Here at Alternatives to Violence, for those partners in the area, we do also work with those who have been victims of sexual abuse. It depends on what agency, whether they focus on whether it's just domestic violence or sexual assault. We have a lot of other great agencies in the area as well, such as SAVA, who helps with this. So a sexual act of forced upon a victim can be rape or attempted rape, unwanted touching, distribution of private information or photos, sodomy. Sexual abuse isn't reported in a lot of communities or cultures because of the way they view it. We see that a lot, and I don't want to speak for anybody, and we can get more into that, but some different cultures, some different races look at it as, no, that's not abuse. That's how we treat our women. They're our property and we do what we want. So we try to be really culturally responsive. We see quite a few people coming in of different cultures here. So we work with all victims, all languages. We have had folks, without going into too many detail, we have had folks from Europe. It's not just Hispanic. We've had what you think of as the mail order brides who come in, and because their husband or partner has looked at them as property, they treat them like property, and that can turn into abuse. If they're married, if they're partners, you can still be sexually abused. Just because you say, well, he didn't rape me because we're married. Consent is all it. If it's unwanted sexual abuse, it is rape, or it can be attempted rape if you are saying no.
Another big one is stalking, which is repeated unwanted surveillance by an individual or group towards another person. I always like to emphasize that it could be a group too. It's not always just one person. Like this first point says, following an intimate partner or having others follow them. That's a big theme that we see these days is, hey, I have friends and you won't know what they look like. You've never met them, but they are following you to the store and they're letting you know where you are and what you're doing. That kind of thing, which, as you can imagine, really gets people worked up and gets in your head a little bit. Stalking these days too is a lot on technology, using passwords, hacking into things, tracking apps. We have car trackers. We have a lovely local mechanic that will check for car trackers whose name I can't remember right now, but I can email anybody that. Just going through a partner's text or phone without permission, things like that. Another unfortunate big theme that we see with stalking is our victims and survivors having a hard time holding down a job, mainly because their abuser will show up at their work, which most workplaces are not a fan of if they're causing a scene or anything like that, and they have to lose their job and they can't keep a job, which ties into financial abuse, which we'll talk about later too. But that's a big theme that we see with stalking, and especially that getting in people's heads of you won't know who's out there looking at you. And then we get clients who come back and say, oh, someone looked at me too long. They know my abuser. They told them that I'm here. And it really just gets people down and can really weigh you down after a while.
And then we have verbal abuse, which I think is probably the second most common that people think of behind physical abuse. So this is occurs when they use words and body language to hurt their partner. So that's put downs, name calling, demeaning criticisms. And that is, again, a repeated pattern of behavior to demean somebody. If you're angry and you get in a fight and you say something you shouldn't say, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is in an abusive relationship, but a repeated pattern to where the name calling and the verbal abuse is trying to control somebody. That's what we're looking for.
Mental abuse is one too and mental abuse is almost always a factor. It's almost always involved because you're mentally distraught, regardless of any kind of these abuses if they're happening to you. I saw gaslighting a lot in the chat. I know that's more commonly understood nowadays than when I started this job. That's a form of manipulation psychologically in which someone kind of puts seeds of doubt in your head and, oh, you won't, no one, you can go ask for help, but no one will believe you because this is all your fault. You made me hit you. You made me do this. That kind of thing, making the victim feel like it's really on them. It's really their fault is a big theme in gaslighting. This also goes into attempts to isolate someone. Isolation is a huge theme that we see here at ATV and just in domestic violence victims in general, because it's really easy sometimes. It's not easy, but it's easier sometimes for folks who have a trusted circle of people who a good support network can help them out of a situation like this. But if you're isolating them from that support network, if you can't, oh, you can't talk to your mom because she doesn't like me and she's going to convince you to leave me, or oh, we need to move out of state where you don't know anyone, or maybe out of country where you don't know the language, so you can't meet anyone. Those are big themes of isolation that we see that really makes it a lot harder for people to leave an abusive situation. And this also just goes into threats in general, coercion, a lot of substance coercion, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. Sometimes abusers will get their partner addicted to substances and pull them off it, and they'll be the supplier, and that'll be a means of abuse in and of itself. But yeah, mental abuse is definitely one that it sounds very it's very implied with every kind of abuse. It's almost always present in a domestic violence situation.
It's about seeing it in the line of work that everybody here is in. We see that a lot with the unhoused. 38% of all domestic violence victims at some point will become homeless. And a lot of that is because they have been isolated previously. So they've lost their support system and don't have anywhere else to go. They've been financially abused, all those things. And 38% of people who've been abused will be homeless. That is crazy. So thanks, Jillian. You're controlling this very well. That also goes to what I'm talking about with financial abuse. It happens when they restrict money. So some of those things will happen like, you don't need to work, I'll take care of you. That's actually not being kind. That works into this form of control. Don't worry, I'll pay all the bills. You don't have to take care of it. The victim then doesn't have access to bank accounts. They don't even know how to pay bills. Don't work with those people. They're not good for you. I'll take care of you. You can stay home. Things like that end up really hurting a person when they do decide to leave. And that is a big factor in why a lot of victims of domestic violence then do not have homes, become part of the homeless population. So a lot of the people that we see coming into shelter, a good amount of folks that we have who join us at our shelter here come in with nothing, barely the clothes on their back. Most of the time they do not have resources. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have driver's licenses. We work a lot with helping folks do that. We also partner with Homeward Alliance. We have the Homeward Alliance folks who come in here one day a week and help with resource navigation for getting these people those documents that they don't have because they've been controlled. They may have lost it leaving quickly, or their abuser has withheld those items just as they have any kind of money or financial support that they need.
So, red flags for a relationship. We're going to go back to the chat. Does anyone have ideas of what a red flag would look like if you're in a relationship that might show you, hey, maybe things are not going great. Maybe things are a little unsafe for me right now.
And not just for yourself, but for others, family, friends, clients that you work with. What are some red flags that may lead you to see that they're in an abusive relationship?
Yes, okay. Isolation, yep, big one. Constantly apologizing, angry outbursts. Always with somebody, overly attached, absolutely. Controlling in public. Scared to engage, absolutely. Speaking for some, have I trained all you guys already? These are perfect. Speaking for someone else, absolutely. Physical marks, avoidance, making excuses. Yeah, these are perfect. Yeah, so I know, and one of you mentioned this first one of fast involvement. Just like, hey, step one, we're gonna spend forever together. It's a little red flaggy. Being quick to anger is a big one too. Just drop at the hat. Your first response to things being anger is probably not a good sign. Extreme jealousy, controlling behavior, isolation, like we talked about. Blaming others, kind of going with that isolation. No remorse for actions, threats of violence. Putting a partner on a pedestal, that's a big one. That's a big one of that cycle abuse that Carrie showed earlier of kind of how they pull you back in of that, oh, I'm so sorry, you're so great, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And then it's hard to leave when someone's treating you that way. Blurred boundaries, negative talk about past partners is a big one. And I think a few you mentioned these last two, of close accompaniment and talking on someone's behalf. If someone ever comes into your agency and it's a couple of people and one of them doesn't want to let their partner talk to you alone, always wants to talk for them, doesn't really let them speak up for themselves, that's a red flag. Maybe try to separate them as best you can. You might be giving that person a chance to ask for help that they really need.
And I see a lot more that have come in. I mean, we could go on and on about red flags, but there's other great ones that you all have put out there that we didn't include on this list, obviously because of space. But consider some of these. Being paranoid, minimizing. Jamie, I like that one a lot. Well, I made him mad. Minimizing is kind of a big thing, and excuses that they give for their abuser. Wrongful imprisonment, totally huge. Disproportionate reactions, being oversensitive of things. Saying sorry too many times with the victim. There are so many red flags that people ignore. And in society, a lot of people have the attitude, well, that's their business. They're a couple, they can deal with that. That's not my place to jump in or say anything. It actually is our place to at least offer the support that we can. And looking at these red flags really helps us to do that.
Carrie, I'll let you talk some about these stats for everyone.
So we have some statistics. The statistics vary nationally. So these are what we see and what we take in. But 1 in 3 women will be a victim of domestic violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 men will be a victim of domestic violence in their lifetime. Sometimes we see that a little different. We see 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. That is typically those who are have been physically abused at some point in their life. This is the definition of domestic violence, of power and control. That's a lot of people. So Kelly, how many people are on this call? 100 right now? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, there's 100 people and more trying to come in, but yes, 100 people.
oh no. So of just the women in here, right, that we're talking like 30-40%, somebody in this room has been a victim of domestic violence. Or trust me, you have known, you have obviously worked, and it might not be obvious, but we have all worked with victims of domestic violence, just in human services. Those of us who work in domestic violence do on a daily basis, but everybody else working in human services, imagine that 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 men. In 2022, Colorado reported 20,400 victims with cases. This is actually hard to determine. In the state of Colorado, we can get other crimes and crime reports based off of reports. So many burglaries were reported, so many whatever assaults were recorded. For domestic violence, they don't keep the statistics unless an arrest has been made or it becomes a case, right? So if people are just calling in reporting domestic violence, that is not shown in this number. So it is likely way, way higher amount. And those are just people who have reported with cases, then just reported goes way up. And then the mass amount of people who do not report that they are victims of domestic violence. In 2022, I think was the last fatality report released for the state. It was either for 2021 or 22. So excuse me on that. I believe there were 67 people who were murdered due to domestic violence in the state of Colorado. That is direct victims, people who were the abused, collateral, folks that happen to be around, children who happen to be around, or children who were used. And I see that was a question on there as forms of abuse. Children are huge at being used for somebody to control their victim. And unfortunately, we've seen it locally, that can oftentimes result in death for children. It's the ultimate way for an abuser to get back to their victim, is to take away their children. I mentioned before, the average is leaving 7 to 10 times, leaving permanently. If you are working with somebody who's in a domestic violence situation, or even if you know somebody, we really emphasize not judging, not forcing people to leave, understanding, but letting folks know that you're still going to be there for them. So, you're choosing to go back, that's okay. I'm here for you. What safety plans can we make so that we can help you know that we're always going to be here if you decide to leave again? Judging, telling folks they're stupid for going back is not going to help. That's going to make people run back faster to their abuser. Personally, for ATV, and I know the other agencies in the area are somewhat similar on calls, we receive about 1,400 crisis calls a year. So a lot in a day of folks who are looking for help. Most of those are people who are looking for shelter. The shelters in the state of Colorado are full all the time. We all really try to help, resource each other, work together, but there's just not enough space in our shelters to help those who are in need. We don't ever just say, sorry, we don't have space for you. We offer other services, as do the other agencies in the area. So Women's Place, Crossroads, Estes Park. We try to work with each other to help folks. We will offer other resources, whether that is going to all of your agencies for help, trying to relocate people where they may have family and it's a safer area, getting hotel rooms if it's safe, if we can. Sometimes there's just things that we can't do, but we don't want to leave people with nothing. We try to help as much as we can.
I'd love to share too, just on a personal note, a lot of people come into working in a domestic violence agency because of their own experience. I'm going to share, and my boss is right there, so she's safe zone. I just needed a job out of college, and this was the first place to hire me. And I immediately decided this is what I need to do because of these numbers, because I was so shocked by how prevalent domestic violence is in our community. And I had no idea. It's everywhere. It's everywhere all the time. There's so many people out there dealing with this problem, and I just had no idea. So now this is kind of my passion, and it's because of these numbers. It's insane. You don't see it, so you don't think it's happening, but it definitely is. This next slide is hopefully review for all of you. It is, so this is our trauma response diagram, I suppose. So we normally live in this window of green here, that window of tolerance. That's where your standard level is of how you behave, what your body's feeling, what your mind's feeling, how your emotions are. And then something trauma happens. And then you either jump up into that hyperarousal or you jump down into that hypoarousal. Hyperarousal is that fight or flight. It's that can't calm down. emotionally distressed, very worked up, sometimes can be aggressive with providers or each other or themselves, just getting very worked up and can't calm down. And then we do also see people going into that hypoarousal, which is the fawn freeze, which is shutting down a little bit, becoming numb, depressed. We have a lot of folks who come into shelter and stay in their room for a few weeks, just to kind of deal with the trauma. We always tell people we're a self-sufficiency program in our shelter too, so they need to be working towards something. But we are a trauma-informed self-sufficiency program. So if what they're working towards is showering every day, that's awesome. That's what we do at that point. And for anyone who doesn't know, because I used to not, it's usually fight, flight, freeze. Fawn is a new addition that we're learning. It's actually doing whatever behavior you need to do that you know will keep you safe. You know, if your partner gets really upset when you leave the cabinet doors open, it's being vigilant and making sure you close them, that kind of thing. Or if your partner gets upset when you speak up, it's staying quiet. It's doing whatever you know in the past has worked to keep you safe. And obviously flight, fight, freeze, we should all be familiar with those ones. But it's always good to keep this in mind too. I'm sure everyone on here knows it's not always, you know, it's not always a Hallmark movie to work with real people. It's not always easy. Sometimes they make it tough, but just keep this in mind. And I struggle with it. Everyone here struggles with it. I have sometimes Sierra will have to remind me, hey, she is going through a lot, you know. It's okay to be frustrated with them, but they are going through a lot right now. It's always good to keep in mind kind of their trauma response and everything they've been through and kind of meet them where they're at as much as you can.
Domestic violence and substance abuse. This is actually how I got into working in domestic violence. So the cross section for me is huge. I previously worked in substance abuse, substance use, and in prevention. A good majority of the clients that we see here at Alternatives to Violence are dealing with addiction as well as mental health issues. But some of those reasons can be that it's a coping mechanism, right? Or the addiction is common among the victim and the perpetrator both. That's how they got together. They use together. And as Jillian mentioned earlier, that can be used as a form of control. Come on, just use with me, and they keep people using. We see that a ton in people who come into shelter here, where they have said, I don't want to use anymore. They convince me I need to, can I help? So we try to work very closely with victims on their road to recovery. With some women who experience abuse, they're more likely to abuse multiple substances prior to and during pregnancy. We see that on a daily basis. So we also work with our partners getting proper prenatal health care, making sure that folks are safe who are pregnant. We have a lot of pregnant folks come through here because that's sort of a time when people are like, hey, I'm pregnant, I'm bringing a baby into the world, and I want to make sure that this baby is safe. And I see questions popping in, and they're good questions. We'll get, even though we're going through them, we'll get back to those when we get to that, because that's a great question as well. You know, some increased the likelihood of violent behavior that the substances do. So some abuse happens because people are using a bit, but remember, we want to keep that control factor into there. They impair rational thinking. So I just got a phone call recently from somebody who was in one of the shelters here, whose partner had left, used something, came back, and in her words, was a totally different person. So they became violent, animal-like, and she was scared, and that person ended up being arrested. But the main thing that we use with coping mechanism that we have to remember is that it is a coping mechanism. We do not turn clients away ever for substance abuse, as I assume most people on here do. I can't make that assumption, but we don't ever turn anybody away. Some folks will want to come into shelter and they may be actively under the influence. We will encourage people to go to detox or go somewhere so that we can make sure that they're safe and others are safe in the shelter. But we do recognize that that is a huge coping mechanism and we do not judge.
Yeah, really, to talk about domestic violence is also to talk about substance use, and it's also to talk about homelessness, because that's just such a big factor in everything. Safe houses are often full, and other options are always limited. So that's often where people end up. They're stuck with the choice of, okay, I can go back to this abusive situation, or I can go try to live on the streets. Sexual and domestic violence is a leading cause of homelessness for women and children. 50% of all homeless women reported domestic violence as the immediate cause of loss of their own housing. So it is a big reason. I mean, when you don't have people in your area, we say you don't have a good relationship with your family, you just moved to the area, you don't have friends yet, you don't have any other place to go, you don't have those options. Or maybe if you go to those places, you don't think that those people will be safe. You think your abuser might try to track you down there and then put your loved ones at risk, put your friends at risk, and you don't want to do that. Something too is that's a big factor is even just having pets. That's a big problem that we see now lately of most shelters aren't equipped to take pets. I wish we all were, but it's a logistic nightmare. We've looked into it. And that's a big factor that people don't want to leave their pets alone and they don't want to, put them in a shelter or anything like that. So they leave and then they don't really have options of where to go if they're wanting to stay with their pet. So they end up on the streets. Lack of steady employment is a big factor too. Obviously, these things just happen with domestic violence sometimes, and then obviously do affect, okay, where am I going next? The biggest question we have from people entering our safe houses, okay, I can stay here for a little while, but then what? Then where do I go? Can you help me with that? What's my next step? And luckily Sierra meets them all and helps them with that. And even though she's not magic, she really is sometimes. And then poor credit, like we discussed with financial abuse, we have so many clients that don't understand their own finances at all. They don't understand that their partner ruined their credit, that they have evictions on their record and things like that. And it's maybe not necessarily their fault, it's likely because of the abuse, but that does make finding housing very difficult. Housing discrimination, there is still stigma around domestic violence. There are still landlords and folks that don't want to take on someone who's actively experiencing domestic violence because they don't want police to come, or they don't want an abusive partner kicking down the door or anything like that, which I will say is very rare. But loss of housing, obviously there's just not enough housing programs. We all know that here. We all try really hard, but it's just, there's a lot of people on our by name list and everything. Can't help everyone. That's a big factor. And a lot of those people that don't get help are because they are homeless, because they are victims of domestic violence or sexual violence. Safety planning. Safety planning is a big one. It is a big buzzword that we use a lot. And it's actually something that after our big training, all the interns come to me and they'll be like, what is safety planning? Everyone keeps using this buzzword, but what is it even? And it's, truth be told, I could give you an entire training on just safety planning. It's pretty nitty gritty. This definition that I have here of it's brainstorming ways to stay safe and reduce the risk of future harm. That's one of like 15 definitions I found. It's not just brainstorming, it's giving them the tools. It's giving them, you don't have a cell phone, let's give you a burner phone or a 911 phone that you can just call 911 on, things like that. It's writing out a plan. I do have some examples here of establishing code words with a trusted person. I've worked with clients that have called 911 and ordered a pizza. And when they say, "Are you aware you're calling 911?" and they say yes, they give the address and police show up instead of a pizza and that kind of thing. And it's the safer way to do that. Sometimes it's my best way to describe safety planning is it's creative thinking about how to stay safe. You have to put yourself in your client's shoes and think, okay, if this is really life or death, what's the next steps? A lot of safety planning goes around, like surrounds children too, and making sure that your children are safe. Teaching your children to dial 911 if they don't know how. Telling them, a code word of, hey, if you hear mommy and daddy fighting or something like that, go to this neighbor's house, that kind of thing, or call grandma or do these things. We see a lot of those great safety plans that folks make with their kids so that they can both sometimes avoid the situation so that they themselves are safe and don't have to see anything, and also maybe get help for their parent that might be in distress or might be in danger. Telling people where you're going and how long you plan to be there. We have a lot of folks in the safe house that sometimes are, our safe house, you can come and go as you please for the most part. We don't keep track of that, but sometimes clients feel safer for us to know where they are and say, hey, I'm going to go to work or whatever. And if I'm not back by 5 p.m., please call my emergency contact, or please call my job or police, or whatever plan that they want in place. That's something that makes people feel a lot better, even if it's silly and if you come back right away, it doesn't hurt to let someone know where you're going to be at. Keeping a log of incidents too is big, especially with stalking victims. We like to suggest this. This just helps with getting protection orders and things like that in the future. Changing phone numbers. I have had countless clients come to me and say, my abuser keeps contacting me and he keeps changing his number. So I block it and he gets a new number. And that's just, sometimes it's just easier for you to change your own number. Because it's very easy for folks to get new numbers. They can do all the apps and WhatsApp and text now and all those things that you can get different numbers, and they can just constantly keep bombarding you no matter how many different numbers you block. It might just be easier for the client themselves to get a new number, as much of a pain as that is. I would also like to point out, I just caught myself saying he is the abuser. Not all abusers are men, not all victims are female.
That was a question, and I'll just answer that. Personally serving here at Alternatives to Violence, we average about, I would say 10%, I think was the last, when I looked at our statistics, 10% of men. We assist all identifying genders here, so it's even hard saying men because we have a lot of trans and non-binary folks as well that come through shelter. But typically at one time or another, there's usually at least one male in shelter or male identifying. So
yeah,
very
definitely.
common.
Thank you guys for asking that. Yeah, we get in the habit of male, female, but that's not always the case at all. More and more lately, yeah, we do see more of every gender, which is awesome. I mean, not awesome that they need the help, but it's awesome that we're here and able to help them. Let's see. And we'll just give a quick plug to ourselves. So we are Alternatives to Violence. We are located in Loveland. We provide all these services here, emergency shelter and 24-hour crisis line being our favorite. We do a housing program and housing resources. Sierra does housing consultations with folks literally every day. Community education like this, we can always do trainings at different agencies too. If anyone's interested in that, let me know. And really just referrals and resource information. We get so many calls of folks that are just saying, hey, I need help with getting diapers for my kid. Where do I go? What do I do? And if we can't help them, we try to keep up to date on all the resources because everything changes so much that we try to direct them in the best direction that could help them. Also, just a shameless plug for our big our big events. We do have a small event tomorrow at Artworks in Loveland. If you want to check out our website, you can learn a little bit more about that. That is our vision statement. We envision a safe community free from domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And we do have, this is a small snapshot of our brand new website that is beautiful, and we love it, and we love to brag about it because it's so pretty. But you can totally contact us there. You can call or text us 24 hours. You can actually, now we can have clients email emergency submissions through our website too. So if folks can't text or can't call, or if it's not safe to do that, they can actually just go on our website and say their needs and say how we could get a hold of them in the future. That's the safest way, and we've reached a lot of folks that way, which is really exciting. I'm also including Crossroads and Greeley's phone numbers on here too, though that is the domestic violence agency in Fort Collins is Crossroads, and in Greeley is a woman's place. They're amazing too. They're on here, I think. But yeah, always give them a call if you're more in that area, but we can help anyone from anywhere too. So
we can do some questions now, which we already had some, and this is prior, so we can answer some questions, and then we are going to jump into specifically those who participate in CAHPS about some training on that. But if you've got questions, pop them in the box and we'll kind of go through now and answer them as best we can. I'm going back up because I know.
I have a few that I saw from the chat that we can maybe start out, and folks can raise their hand as well.
And I would like to say as well that Kelly, I saw a few folks here from A Woman's Place and Crossroads as well. Anybody feel free to answer these questions that folks have who work in domestic violence. We just did the training because there was one person here, but I would love to hear the voice of many. So go ahead, Kelly.
Sure. There was a question earlier on that talked about kind of lasting effects of domestic violence, which I think is kind of relating to just the effects of trauma. And I know many of our partners do often work with people that maybe aren't currently actively in a domestic violence relationship, but have experienced that before and are still affected by that. So perhaps you can chat just a little bit about common things that we see kind of after the relationship is not kind of imminent. There's not imminent danger, but still is a challenge.
yeah, I'd speak to that and just say, you know, those emotional impacts are lifelong a lot of times, and that trauma is lifelong to deal with. And especially even the physical abuse. We have a lot of folks who, you know, have permanent injuries that they have to deal with, or TBI injuries that they have to deal with for life because of the abuse that they've experienced. And I know I did see one specific to strangulation too, because I mentioned that the long-term effects of strangulation can be, similar to TBI, just a lot of confusion, but it can be even as serious as stroke or blood clots, lots of blood clots, things like that, that you don't catch right away. So that's why that's always important to get that checked out too.
Hans or Hans?
It's Hans, but thank you. So I ran into a situation with a person that I was working with that was a victim of sexual assault that was not by a domestic partner, and really struggled to find shelter for her because there was specific funding only to a domestic partnership. And it became very challenging to find any type of help for this individual, even with the police report and documentation of the sexual assault that we couldn't find any shelter. We looked all across the Front Range and even into Wyoming. But I mean, this was still a person who visits the same shelter, who lives in the same community. And just because it was not specifically a domestic partnership, it was impossible to find any type of domestic violence or any assistance for the sexual assault.
So Hans, there's a few different shelters, and for reasons not one is better than the other, it's just the focus. So at Alternatives to Violence, we actually do shelter folks who have been victims of sexual assault. Keep in mind that means we have to have an opening for that to happen. So if we're calling around a few places, there are shelters, and you can look at a resource page. We can provide that for you if you want to reach out to us on agencies who do accept folks that are not just straight intimate partner violence, but have been victims of sexual assault. I believe Longmont Safe Shelter St. Vrain does as well. The issue that we're always going to have, those of you who are advocating for your clients and working for them, is space. We ran at 102% capacity last year. We are currently redesigning our safe house to add 3 more rooms. But most of them in the state are just full. That's why we will also work to call around and look. I do want to emphasize for other providers, we cannot have a case manager call us and say, hey, you need to take this person into shelter, or you have a space, can you? Here's their situation. We are always going to ask that you have the client call us directly. And there's lots of reasons for that. It's criteria for screenings that we use to come in. Sometimes the stories may change a little different, but we do need to hear directly from the client. So if ever we say, I'm sorry, yeah, we can let you know that if there's space available, you can give us a background. If the client has given you a release of information to talk about that. Did we not go over, did I totally skip over privilege, Jillian? Because
That's in the next part. though, but if anyone
okay,
wants to
I
hang
am
on.
gonna bring that up a little bit. So it's in pertaining to CAHPS, but I'll mention it for those who are planning on hopping off. That and I won't go into too much detail, but domestic violence and sexual assault agencies follow a Colorado state statute that provides us privilege that we cannot be called to testify for anything a client has told us. We can't be subpoenaed, anything like that. So we will go more into it on CAHPS, but I just want to emphasize for the rest of you, don't think that domestic violence or sexual assault providers are being rude when we say we can't talk to you. We have to talk to your client directly. That is why, unless they sign a specific release of information. And if you want a client to do that, that's fine too. You know, Al, you've got good points on here too. So at some point I want you to speak up, but they do have space now at Crossroads, Al is saying. So, and oh, look at you guys jumping in. A Woman's Place has 8 rooms, 28 beds. We have 9 rooms, 23 beds, going to increase by 2. Longmont, I don't think there is anybody on here from Safe Shelter of St. Vrain because they're not in our COC, but they're close enough if you needed to refer people. There's no limit on, hey, you need to be in our Northern Colorado COC area. Safe Shelter St. Vrain's about the same size that we are too. So if anybody needs a resource list, please call us.
Let's see. I think there was Renee, let's have Renee's question, and then there's a couple really good ones in the chat I want to circle back to.
Great.
Hi, thank you. I'm Renee. I'm with North Colorado Health Alliance. I'm a community health care manager, and I've run into this situation a couple times with a couple of members that I've interacted with, where they've been able to give me quite detailed encounters that they've experienced, both from like horrific physical and sexual abuse that they've encountered. But one that's kind of resonated with me was a woman that I was working with who told me about this situation that she went through. She was unable to see the face of her abuser, and I saw all like the red flags from the partner who was in the room. And just based on her account of what she was telling me, and like it was pretty clear that it was her partner who did it, because there was no other, like, it wouldn't make any sense with the way that the timing worked that she explained for it to be anybody but her partner. But at the same time, she was very adamant, like, he gets mad at me, but no, he's not he's not the one who did it. And I guess I got to a point where I was kind of at a loss. I didn't know like how to help her get connected. And I know she was afraid to ask for help. And there were multiple times where I tried to withdraw her like singly so that she could have that opportunity to talk openly without having that shadow over her of a fear of what might happen if she said anything in front of her partner. Um,
That's a good
it was like,
instinct.
it
Is
was really, really impossible. And she was, she was, um, she was terrified of it happening again. And based on the accounts that she told me, I definitely understand. Like, it was horrific, like what she went through. Um, And I think the sickening part is that when I was at the time that I met with this member, I was face to face with her, and her partner was in the room. And while she was crying and telling me about her experience, he was smiling in the background, like he knew I knew. Um, and I don't know if it was the fear or the fact that she was not able to physically see his face, um, from what had happened, that she doesn't believe that he did it. And like, I didn't try to convince her one way or the other because I didn't want to make it more difficult for her. But I don't know how to advocate, I guess, and help educate about those red flags further
so
than what we already did.
everything you did was right in trying to separate and trying to offer information. We also, if anybody wants to call us, we have, Jillian, do you have one in front of you? The cards? We have smaller accordion style cards. Jillian is showing you there that has red flag information and resources. Those are intended, the best place for those is a restroom, where if you've got a display in a restroom, that's the one place that the abuse partner usually doesn't go with somebody. So anybody who has health facilities here or restrooms and you want some of those from us, call us and we can get those to you. They're very discreet. So if somebody sees it in the restroom, they can put it in their pocket, hide it in their wallet, things like that. Unfortunately, you cannot see how nice and small it is being on there. So anybody, please reach out to us and we can get you packets of those to keep. There's just, the best you can do is try to offer resources, know you're there. Hey, if you need to call me when the person's not around, that sort of thing. So everything you did do is correct.
Okay, and what about like when we're out in the community and doing direct like home visits? Like, what would be your best advice for those situations? Because that's a lot of the encounters that we have, not necessarily having them come into our office, although they do that as well.
It's very dangerous to try to give information when you know an abusive partner is around. And I would highly suggest never to call anybody out on it because you're putting yourself at risk at home visits. We also cannot call law enforcement if we suspect that somebody is a victim of abuse, because that puts them in a very, very dangerous and precarious position as well. I have had people say, should I have a welfare visit done? Should I call the police? I believe they're being abused. And I will always say, absolutely not. Because if the police show up at the door and wants to question and say, hey, somebody thinks you're being abused and the abuser is there, the fallback from that could be very dangerous. So the best thing you can do, again, if it is a home visit, if there's a way to slip them information, If you have documents that you give to people, if you can have a disclaimer, if you're being abused or if you need assistance, call these numbers and put them as referrals. That is absolutely the best thing you can do. And I will say for anybody, just let folks know you are there to reach out to for assistance.
Okay, thank you.
Al, and then there's a couple questions in the chat we'll get to.
Okay,
Some of those are from Al, so that'll
yeah.
be.
I think quite a few of them are from me. Sorry about that.
No, it's
So
good.
my big areas of concern are harm reduction and withdrawal with clients. And with that one, I just am curious, how do we support our clients going through withdrawal, whether that be substance use they have participated in on their own or has been forced upon them by an abuser? How do we support them through that while recognizing policies in place that may not be conducive to substances within the shelter?
That is an extremely good question and something that we deal with a lot. We obviously can't allow substances in our shelters, you know that,
Mhm.
because of federal laws and
Yeah.
danger to other people. We really highly support receiving medical help when they're going through withdrawal. Jillian and Bolsier they have been case managers with our clients, so they can probably answer this better than I can. But I will say in connection with that, with harm reduction, I don't care what people don't do when they're on their property. I do, but I don't judge. We understand and we let them know, hey, maybe you could go somewhere else if you need to, but we always offer the resources that are needed with the knowledge that some people are not going to say, yeah, I want to be sober. Send me
Mhm.
somewhere. We have had a lot of incidences, including one of our properties that we have having to tear down for meth use in the property.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to talk to me more about that, they can. But Jillian, how do you experience those who are going through withdrawal, which is very common, by the way?
It is, especially because we can't have substances in the house. Obviously, that's just kind of the natural progression, or sometimes they've just left their partner who was the provider of substances. And honestly, the best approach we have is to really be blunt and open about it with them and say, hey, this is something that might come up for you in the next few days. Please talk to us, check in with them often, because they might not want to check in with you. They might be unable to move in their room, and things like that. We can go over in water or food if they need to. We can obviously, like Carrie said, it's always preferred if we can get them medical attention and kind of hold their room for them while they're addressing that need first.
That's a key one right there, Jillian. So we
Yeah.
do not, if we can get people to go seek medical attention, we will hold their room for as long as we need to while they're doing that and do
That's great.
check-ins.
Yeah. So a few of the other questions I had pertain to disabilities, the LGBTQ community, and BIPOC individuals, as well as being culturally responsive to incidents that may be occurring. First one is, I know, for example, at Crossroads, we have a large number of doors and security checkpoints that you have to get through to get to your individual room. And I'm wondering how we can be better at assisting clients with disabilities and creating a space that's more accommodating aside from just having an ADA room. And if any other shelters have had experience with this.
Um, both Kelly and I have worked at Crossroads, so I'm very familiar with the setup as it is. Really sitting down and being aware of, specifically for disabilities, being aware of the disability and how we can assist in any way so that we're not making it more trauma. Here at ATV, we are a multi-level house, unlike Crossroads, that's one level, and you do have multiple security points. So maybe in that instance, if somebody who's sitting at the front can help and call an advocate in, that could help the disabled person so they're not having to navigate,
Mhm.
having a phone number that they could call directly. we have stairs that go up to, we have an ADA level, but we cannot help the fact in this old house that we've got stairs that go up to our kitchen. So we provide disabled clients or folks who have a difficult time doing that with a microwave and a refrigerator. So really sitting down with the client and saying, what are your challenges and how can we help you get through that? As far as cultural and LGBTQ, same. It's understanding. It is sitting down, being aware of their biases, prejudices, knowing how you can help and how they feel about others. We've had quite a few Muslim clients in. We make the space to be able to do prayer when they've needed to do prayer. What else, Jillian?
Honestly, we have a lot of, obviously just because of the nature of our building, we have a lot of fire regulations and things we can't allow in the rooms, but sometimes we have Native American folks who want to burn sage or whatever that they feel that they need to do in that space to heal and everything. And we try to make exceptions for that or make a space outside that's specific to that they can use. So yeah, we try to little things like that. I know we're getting more cultural food now with our groceries and everything.
We ask for a grocery list every week so folks can tell us, you know, if they've got special dietary needs and cultural foods. The Native American, and as well as I believe we've had a few Buddhist examples as well. We can't allow open fire, but we do make some exceptions as long as they call us and tell us when we're doing it so that we can be aware in case we see any dangerous situations happening.
Even things like getting African-American clients hair products, you know, sit
Yeah.
down, play dumb. I don't know your hair products. Please tell me. Or can I just get you a gift card and you can pick it out yourself? That kind of thing. You don't
That's
think
such
about
a
those
huge
things.
one.
But yeah, it's a big
Yeah,
one.
in places I've worked before and worked with clients before, they've been distraught over like, I can't do my hair and that makes me feel worse each day because in a society that's predominantly white, we don't even think of that to provide those products to individuals. So I love that.
Yeah, black hair products are not donated very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we'll specifically ask for them, but we do offer gift cards and things. We have our lovely Sierra is answering some questions as well in the chat. Thank you, Sierra, for doing that. But Kelly, I'll let you moderate here.
Yeah, and I do want to keep moving too, so we have time to get to the portion related to CAHPS specifically. There was one question though. Oh, where was it? Brian asked a question about, oh man. Oh, one of the things that I was actually, it was related to a couple of questions, but basically, especially for those who are working with people who are experiencing either unsheltered homelessness or are staying in like regular emergency shelters, and they're oftentimes people will be in a partnership for safety because of that, you know, being homeless and experiencing that is in and of itself not safe. And sometimes being with a partner makes you feel more safe, even if that person's mistreating you. And so I'm just curious if you have any, and maybe we can transition and talk about this with our providers through CAHPS, like just thinking about like safety planning or how to support people in that, where they're maybe not staying at the safe house and they're in that relationship. They're not going to be leaving necessarily, or they're going to be seeing that person, and just some kind of specific safety planning ideas or things that might be helpful for our case managers on the call that work with folks in that situation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I hope I can do it justice, honestly. I think in those situations, especially if you're unhoused, staying in an area you're familiar with is huge. Just so that you know, worst case scenario, I can run into this McDonald's and ask for help, you know, something like that. But also just kind of navigating those resources, thinking about if relocating is the safest option in that situation, and then accessing those resources that might be able to help you with that. Like I said, safety planning is really thinking outside of the box. I was on a crisis call once with a woman who was under a bridge in Denver with her abusive partner, and she couldn't take down any other resources or anything like that. So we just started thinking outside the box. I was like, is there a street nearby? How fast is the traffic? Could you flag down a car if you need to? Is there a business nearby that you can use their phone if you need to, or ask for help? Really putting yourself in their shoes and thinking about every situation and every scenario and those options in those scenarios is really helpful.
Mhm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think just so that we don't run out of time, let's keep going and we'll talk more about how this is all pertaining to our CAHPS coordinated entry system.
Yes, and I'll put it in there again. If anyone had a burning question and we didn't get to it, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
And you'll see Sierra's answering questions. So continue to pop questions on there. And while Sierra's going to mainly do the next portion of the CAHPS call, if you are hopping off the call, again, you can reach out to either Jillian, myself, or Sierra. We can also do presentations for your staffs if it's important. If not all your staff is on here and you want us to do a DV 101 kind of training for your staff, we can do that as well. So please reach out to us.
Awesome. Well,
And for those, if anyone's hopping off, just so you know, we're recording. I'm going to be sending this out and also posting on our website. So you'll get that.
Really quick, I'm going to answer Jeanette's question. In Eastern Colorado, there are 2 shelters, one in Sterling and one in Fort Morgan, who off the top of my head, I don't even remember what they're called. Help me share is in Fort Morgan. So they are awesome agencies as well. So if you're out in Eastern Colorado, look them up, reach out to me. I can give you their contact information.
all righty. Well, CAHPS specific, let's get into it. And I will hand it off to Carrie to start us in explaining privilege.
Yeah, I touched on this previously a little bit before, because this is a super, super common question that we get, and it's very, very hard to explain. So CRS, Colorado,
State statute.
what?
State statute.
Thank you. I don't know why I'm like, so a victim's advocate, here's the technical term, minimized a little bit, scrunched down. Victim's advocate shall not be examined as to any communication we made to such victim's advocate by a victim of domestic violence or a victim of sexual assault in person or through the media of written records or reports without the consent of the victim. So basically what this says, and those go more into it, a victim, if we work for a domestic violence agency or a sexual assault agency and have received training, domestic violence advocates, it is 15 hours of training. Sexual assault, it's 30 hours. We here at ATV, because we do both, just do 30 hours of training. All this means is you're afforded privilege. So what is very, very important for victims of sexual assault or domestic violence in this instance is confidentiality. And the law says, or the state statute says, that with our training, thanks Kelly for putting that up there, that we cannot testify, be subpoenaed, any of that information, or release information to anybody because we hold privilege. That's for a very good reason. Common sense is that victims of violence can have people all over the place who are sharing their information. So we follow this state statute. When we are not speaking to you about a client, this is why, because we want to be able to protect that client as best we can. Not because we're worried about the law coming after us or because we're being difficult. but because we want to protect the client the best we can, and we don't want to have to go testify or subpoena where it can damage their case. That is very convoluted and complicated, this statute. So please reach out if you have any questions about it.
We did include this in the CAHPS portion too, just to explain, if you're ever wondering, I know in CAHPS meetings, a lot of times it's, hey, has anyone worked with John Smith recently, or has anyone seen them recently? No domestic violence provider will ever answer that question because we can't. Even if I have seen that person, I can't tell you about it. I can't confirm or deny. We need clients' permission to talk to anyone about anything, always. So
And
that's why that's included
And that
here.
permission needs to be specific. So it preferably needs to be written. It can be verbal as long as it's documented, but it preferably needs to be written and it needs to be specific. Who we can release, what information we can release, who we can talk to. So, and in my little quotes down there, privilege, that's what we will always refer to this, really, is confidentiality is privilege. We hold privilege.
Alrighty, so in kind of tying in with that, I'd love to explain more about those pesky coded names that drive you all crazy. That is why those names are coded. We cannot share those names. It's very necessary because our CAHPS calls are big. There's a lot of new faces sometimes. You might know our clients. You might know them professionally or personally. And our clients might not want you to know that they are a victim of violence and that they are seeking services. That's there is still stigma around that. That's a big factor of it. Also, we are in big meetings and abusers are everywhere. They are everywhere and we can just never be too careful. And our clients, we have some clients who are very, very particular about who gets their information, who gets their last name even. It's scary. They're scared. And so we have to be very careful on their behalf. So that's why those names are coded. And you can see those are the examples to the right there of what those coded names kind of look like. You've all seen them, I'm sure. There's hundreds of clients on the bio name list. Those, I don't want you to be working with someone and say, oh yeah, Jane, I saw her as a DV victim in the CAHPS meeting. And maybe that client you're talking to is that person's abuser, things like that. We just have to be careful. That being said, if you're ever meeting with someone and they say, oh yeah, I've been scored, I've done the SPDAT, but I did it with a domestic violence provider, reach out to us if we get their permission, like their written permission, like we said, we can share that code with you and then you can participate in that case conferencing. Again, we can't share anything about that client, but you might not have those same regulations or those same barriers. So you reach out to us. We do that a lot with folks. We're always happy to do that. Another really big question that we get, Sierra gets this question probably once a week, is, hey, someone said that you scored them and I can't find them in HMIS. You will not find them in HMIS. Any victim service provider classified as a victim service provider under the Violence Against Women's Act cannot use HMIS. It's literally a law. Kelly has been very nice in trying to help us work around it, but I don't think it's going to happen. So that's why you don't see our people in HMIS. If you talk about HMIS, we really don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen it. I trust that it's great, but that's a big question we get of, why can't I find this person in there? They're not in there. That doesn't mean that they are not on the list. We have our own, A Woman's Place, Crossroads, and ATV have a very, very long detailed spreadsheet, each of us, that we send to Summer every single week. And bless her heart, she organizes all of it and makes sure that there's no duplication or anything like that. So they are still on the list. They are still included in CAHPS. They're just not in HMIS, and that is literally a law. And I will now pass it over to our lovely Sierra to explain some fun, hefty definitions from HUD here for you.
Yeah, so this is a huge block of text, but basically we wanted to go over the different definitions of homeless, especially because one of them is something that our DV providers run into a little bit more often. The first one, category 1, that you can see here is the one that you probably work with, on a daily basis. You all know what it is, a family who lacks a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence, the folks who are staying in cars, in shelters, out on the streets, all of those folks who are quite literally homeless without any place to stay. But with all of that, there's another important category that I'd like to talk about as well, which is category 4. Category 4 is specially designed for folks who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, and it's designed to try to help give funding and opportunities to people who just need more resources in order to actually leave their perpetrator. So the definition of it is any individual or family who is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, has no other residence, and lacks the resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing. And so what that looks like is, a mom and her kids stuck living with their perpetrator. They have no family in the area. They have no friends in the area. They're quite literally just kind of stuck. And with the power and control that we talked about, the financial abuse that we talked about, they just don't have any resources to get out. And so for a lot of folks, this category 4 enables them to use rapid rehousing resources to get out and have a place that's paid for while they work on rebuilding, credits and their credit and their job and all of that good stuff. At Alternatives to Violence, we are right now one of the only provider who can help take category 4 people in, which is why we try to emphasize that in our referrals. Just to spread out our resources. We're hopeful that funding will change in the future, and we'll keep you posted when it does. But yeah, that's the definition of category 4.
In case anyone's ever working with someone too that is category 4 homeless, so they're not on the streets yet, they're still living with their abuser, but it is unsafe and they want to leave. Please refer them to us or DV agency closest to you. You can score them. I'm pretty sure, unless Kelly tells me otherwise. But just Sierra's a pro at it now. Just send them our way if that's easier for you.
And the folks who, like Gianna was saying, are in category 4 are normally in need of, some pretty hefty domestic violence specific, keeping themselves safe. So please refer them to us. And yeah, that'd be awesome. And then another big definition that we see a lot on those CAHPS calls is the difference between vulnerability level and imminent danger, and just kind of, why is included for some folks and not for others. So for vulnerability, vulnerability is something that everyone on the CAHPS list has, otherwise they don't need to be on there. And it's that fun little section of extra factors like vulnerability to illness and death, high utilization of emergency services, significant functional impairments, all of that. And so this is the section that you guys are probably the most familiar working with, and saying that they have a high vulnerability level means that maybe they have cancer and need treatment, or they just really need to get off the streets and have a higher prioritization for getting housing. So just like vulnerability is that sort of scale, there's also a specific scale called imminent danger for folks who are fleeing domestic violence. And so imminent danger describes how much danger a victim is from their perpetrator. So imminent danger is another vulnerability factor that we factor into how much danger our victims are in, because it does increase how much they need housing and how quickly they need to get into somewhere if their imminent danger is high. And we'll talk about that more on this next slide. So imminent danger is a pretty vague term, just kind of like vulnerability is. For imminent danger, this is what I personally kind of rank my folks that I score. I believe it's probably similar for a woman's place in Crossroads, but just so you guys know what we mean when we're talking about having low imminent danger, medium, and high. These are examples of that. So having low imminent danger, we kind of think about the domestic violence victim is away from their perpetrator. So, they're kind of out of that, terrible environment, but they're still suffering immediate effects. This could look like the victim living with family or friends, or the perpetrator has been arrested. And so kind of on paper, they seem sort of fine, but they're not, they still need the help. There's a lot of other factors that go into it, like the perpetrator being released on bond at any time, or they could be released at any time just because it's all full and there's no space to keep them there. As well as talking earlier, like Jillian was saying about how, people are scared that if they live with their family and friends, that the perpetrator is going to come after their family and friends. They're worried they're going to draw attention and danger to their loved ones. And so, though they're still definitely needing the help, they need the housing and resources, but their life is not quite in danger yet. But of course, these levels are flexible. Medium levels of imminent danger, we tend to qualify more as someone still living with their perpetrator, so still interacting with their perpetrator daily, but currently able to avoid conflict if needed and for now. Again, very flexible, things could go south pretty fast, but as of right now, the victim is kind of able to walk on eggshells and be vigilant into what their perpetrator is looking for. To kind of sort of keep the peace, but there's still a lot of danger involved because they are being exposed to their perpetrator, on a near daily basis. Lastly, the high levels of imminent danger is when perpetrators are threatening high levels of physical harm or even death. These are the folks who just super high vulnerability, very high concerns from us. And some of those kind of warning signs that we look for to place folks into this level of imminent danger is the perpetrator having access to weapons, having used weapons against the victim before, having strangled them before is a huge kind of warning sign that things are about to get worse and are about to escalate. And also heavily restricting access to their basic needs, not allowing them to have a car, not allowing them to eat during, whenever they're hungry, or not allowing to take their kids outside, or not letting them have their phone. All of this are very high signs that, these people need to get out. And so when we're, as DV providers, when we're saying that someone is in high imminent danger, we're not trying to absolutely take over the vulnerability list and try to scooch our way in there ourselves. Imminent danger is a huge vulnerability factor. And so that's why it's a big discussion when we're talking about, CAHPS referrals and, trying to get all those resources out to folks. And so with this, with all those hefty definitions out of the way, the VI SPDAT is itself not super trauma informed. And so I'd love to just take a minute and talk about, some of the small little things that you can do while you're administering the VI SPDAT. If you know that they're a victim of domestic violence, or maybe you see some of those red flags and, maybe they might. And just using the wording and trying to be as gentle with it throughout the assessment as you can. One of the big things that I look for when I'm doing the assessment with folks is when they're families and it's a single mom with children, being pretty conscious of how you use the word family. A lot of the questions are like, have you and your family been able to have a safe place to sleep? Or how long has your family been homeless? Having that family is pretty big for a lot of these victims. Their family, their perpetrator, they're often married to them. They're still part of their family. They still love them. And so it can create a lot of confusion for victims, trying to figure out how to answer that question when they're leaving their family behind. Do I include the perpetrator? Do I not include the perpetrator? And so I normally just say, you and your kids, or you and the people you're moving in with, just trying to make that more gentle for them. And if they're category 4 homeless, they probably don't see themselves as homeless because they still have a roof over their head. And so hearing the word homeless thrown at them can be kind of startling, especially going through such a heavy assessment. And so if you can, saying stuff like housing instability, when the situation started, just trying to, make the assessment as easy for them as we can. And again, I'm sure you guys do, this sort of stuff with your regular folks, but if they're really emotional, offering breaks throughout, not prying or asking additional questions about the domestic violence or the trauma unless absolutely relevant, if they need to talk about it, they will. And, they'll know that you're a person they can explain that to. But if they just say yes or no, they've answered the question and that can be good enough. And again, I'm sure you guys do this too, but always thanking them at the end. Victims, have to explain their story over and over and over again to different providers in order to qualify and get the help that they need. So recognizing that, saying, I know you've had to tell this story 1,000 times. Thank you for doing it again. I'm sure you guys do that already for the people that you assess.
Something too that Sierra does that I love is she'll, like, before they even start, she'll just give people a heads up of, hey, some of these questions might be triggering. Just because folks, when they are in domestic violence, you never know what's going to trigger someone and make them upset and bring up a lot of hidden emotions. And honestly, sometimes I mean, we share a wall. She's on the other side of the wall right now. So I hear a lot of them, and sometimes folks are like, oh, that was way easier than I thought it was going to be. And sometimes folks are crying in her office for an hour longer than they probably should be. So you just never know how people are going to take some of those questions. They are blunt questions. So giving them kind of a heads up too probably doesn't hurt.
Yes, always helpful. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and get onto the referrals. I'm sure some of you have gotten a referral from me and you're like, why is she being so specific on how to contact this person? Communication and technology with domestic violence survivors can be a lot. And it's really important to follow the preferred method of contact. Like we talked earlier, people hacking into emails, into texts, into phone calls, all of that is super important to take into consideration. So when I'm doing the assessment, asking, does he read your texts? Will he listen to voicemails? Do you think he has access to your email? And so when I get all that information, that's what I try to pass on to you. I know it can, we all have our preferences. If I like calling people more than emailing them, but this can be a very huge safety risk. We want to make sure that we're contacting them in a way that they know is safe and in a way that their perpetrator doesn't have access to. So I know I had a lady I assessed a couple months ago who was like, you can only contact me for 4 hours, in the beginning of a day, 1 day a week, and only through text, because then I can delete those texts. And, at the surface level, you're like, wow, that's kind of a lot, but she knows her situation best and she's the expert in it. If she knows that's what's going to keep her safe, then that's what we're going to follow. And so even though it can kind of be a pain getting a hold of some of our folks, it's normally for a very good reason. They're trying to make sure that they're safe when they respond to you and that there's no risk of someone else overhearing them. And with all of that, just giving them extra patience. Like we talked about before, the effects of abuse are super long lasting. There are folks who are phone avoidant, who are email avoidant, just giving them the extra patience to work through that at their own pace. And also, as I'm sure we're all very well aware, we are working with folks who have mental illness, PTSD, anxiety, and depression, people who forget a ton, who need tons of reminders. I met with a woman who had really severe, I forget the word of it, but like going outside, like just getting out of her house was a huge struggle. And so, she came into the office shaking. So just being gentle with it. And when you meet these folks, they just need a little extra patience. And then lastly, talking about housing domestic violence referrals. I know, and probably throughout hearing this training, hearing about all the risks and the safety factors and high imminent danger levels, you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not qualified to help these folks. You are, you can do it. These folks are just like any other people on the list. They just have some specific confidentiality needs. And with that, I'm not going to refer someone to you who, their perpetrator has guns and is constantly busting down doors. For folks who have really high imminent danger levels, they don't have the time to wait on the CAHPS wait list. As much as we love it, the 6 months isn't super ideal for someone with imminent danger that high. So if they have imminent danger that high, we're working on relocating them. We're working on figuring out plan Bs. Because if there is that much danger, then it's going to be pretty hard to make sure that they're safe anywhere. So the folks that we refer to you, we've safety planned with them, and you can always, if you have questions, refer to us. We're more than happy to help. You need cameras, we've got them. If you need resources to get cameras or lock changes, that's totally something we can deal with. And like Carrie mentioned earlier, we've never I don't know how long our program's been around, but for however long we've been doing this, we've never once had, knock on wood, a perpetrator, come up or bust down a door or anything like that. So I know it's a little intimidating because you can't see their names or their specific situations, but they really are, pretty similar to the rest of the folks on the by name list. Of course, if there's immediate safety concerns, have them call 911. It's not your responsibility to try to figure out all of it to make sure that they're safe. We don't call 911 on behalf of our clients either. So that's something, you can always refer out and make sure that they're okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our CAHPS portion. What are questions, thoughts, concerns? I see Summer's been helping us out in the chat a little bit.
Yeah, I think for these, I didn't see any extra questions coming in necessarily, but if we can get a little more into the weeds. Right now we have about 15 minutes left. So if you are, working, housing people, you've gotten referrals from DV programs, or you are assessing people who are identifying as victims, you're not sure where to send them, things like that, please, this is a good time. We can talk through it.
One more note on the referrals. If you do get a DV referral, please don't question them on their abuse and the details of it and what happened. It's just not necessary. Again, like Sierra said, they'll share if they want to, if they need to. That they will just do that naturally. That's not required.
We've already, I don't assess folks unless they've been, unless they've experienced domestic violence. And I know the same is true for Women's Place Crossroads. So yeah, you don't need to re-verify it or decide it on your own. It's already, been decided. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a domestic violence referral.
Yeah, Lisa.
So I had to step off to take a call. So if you already addressed this, I can just talk to somebody afterwards. But is there a mechanism between our DV providers and I'm guessing Summer and or Kelly, so that like if I assess somebody on the street who tells me their name is Susie Smith and they have been assessed at ATV and they're ATV 42, that there is realization there so that we don't have the same person?
Yes, thank goodness that's, I'm pretty sure it's 100% Summer.
Okay.
Because she's on, they all signed a release of information for Summer specifically, so we can share everyone's name with her, so
Cool.
she kind of compares. It sounds like a headache, but I appreciate her for doing it.
And then with that, like I recently had somebody else within the Summit Stone system who reached out and said, we have a client here who says they did a VA at ATV and we need to update it. And I was like, okay, well, I can't do any of that. I can't see any of that. So they like their best bet would just to be contact them. I'm assuming that you guys, y'all track like CLSs and all that stuff in the same way that we do, just not in HMIS. Okay. I told them, I said, if like the DV concern is no longer, or like that's not an issue, we could re-VA SPDAT and put them in HMIS. But if that was a concern still, that it should just go through you all. Does that seem like the right answer, Sierra?
Yes.
Cool.
And if you can always shoot me an email and say, hey, this person talked to me and they're looking to update their information. I can only respond annoyingly vague. I will say,
Oh yeah, totally.
confirm or deny. But if it's applicable, I will still reach out to that person. I will still update their stuff on my end. You just will not have the closure
Yeah.
of knowing if that happened or not.
Cool. I understand that totally. I work for a HIPAA controlled agency, so thank
Yeah.
you.
The fun games
Thanks.
to play.
I'll just hop in on that. For folks, so we something that we kind of struggle with that it's just inherent in the system of having coded names and confidentiality and kind of including kind of everyone on our by name list at one time is you know, in case conferencing and whatnot. But if someone really would be better served and they're using mainstream homelessness resources regularly, like they're known in the community, and also they're experiencing domestic violence and they're and they, you know, and they're willing to sign a regular release and get put into HMIS and kind of be talked about on the by name list with their name. That's preferable because there's more people available to help coordinate services. I mean, we've talked, I mean, any of you that go to the case conferencing, it's always better as far as care coordination if we know who we're talking about. But that's not always the safest thing. And so the people that are coded, it's for a reason that they're coded. And so if someone's situation's changed and they really don't really need that level of confidentiality anymore, and they can be assessed by a regular access point and put on the list, like that's probably preferable. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be eligible for a DV resource, because we also ask about their domestic violence, and so that's flagged, and that's they could be referred still. But we just want to try to do like, it's just like we try to find the best housing resource. We want to make sure we're talking about like we're care coordinating the best way we can for folks as well. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and before I do the assessment, I always talk about like, hey, this is normally how it goes. Normally people who take this assessment get put into like a database, but instead you won't be. And normally, you know, they get to talk about the folks in the database, but all your stuff will be confidential instead. So all the people that I assess at least know that they have options and know that they can change it if they want. And I have had some people take me up on the offer of like, no, I'd rather be in a database. I'd rather have everyone know my information and talk about it. For the vast majority of them, they enjoyed the confidentiality of it.
I guess with that, Sierra, if hypothetically somebody had been assessed recently with you and the situation hadn't changed, if they signed the release, would you be able to just, you know, send me the stuff and then I input into HMIS rather than having to reassess?
Yeah,
If that's what they wanted and we got the release and all of that. Okay, cool.
yes, yeah,
That would probably be better than re-asking it all.
yeah, if it's recent stuff, we're able to do that.
Cool.
I have a question. And you would think that I might know the answer to this, but I don't. When I am deduplicating the list, sometimes they have a code and sometimes they've been entered into HMIS about the same time. And I am not sure, like, which one do we keep on the list?
That's fair. I feel like maybe if that comes up, to reach out to us or a woman's space or Crossroads, and maybe because we can feel out maybe how important that confidentiality was for that person. Because some people are kind of like, yeah, that's good. I don't want people to know my name. But some people are like, yes, please don't let anyone see my name at
Mhm.
all. So we can contact them and kind of clear it up on our end too. So yeah, just reach out. We have that.
Okay. I get concerned that when that happens, that I'm just wanting to make sure people know what those releases mean, and not on your end, probably on the other end, when they get entered into HMIS, that they understood what that meant. So I'll just, if I see it, bring it up.
Good point.
Are there any other questions either around CAHPS or just if you've worked with clients that are experiencing DV or have in the past and you have questions, now would be a good time.
You can always call us too, me or Tiara or Carrie, anyone, if you just have like a DV question or a CAHPS specific DV question or any of that, just we're super contactable. For any input or help or anything like that, so.
I will also say, for those of you just, so we had ATV give this presentation. Thank you so much to you all. But it was also developed with kind of collaboratively with our A Woman's Place and Crossroads staff as well. And so they, you know, their programs are slightly different, but generally everything that was in here is applicable for all three organizations. So definitely I, you know, speaking for AWP and Crossroads, I know they've been in the chat, but you can always contact them as well. And if there's like bigger questions or things around like how the CAHPS process works related to DV, like we do have monthly meetings with just our victim service providers, kind of outside of case conferencing to talk through some of these things. So you can always contact Summer or really probably just email the CAHPS email with that, and we can kind of brainstorm all together to try to just make sure we're opening up access. That's really the goal, is to make sure everybody has equitable access to all of our housing resources, and then has the best chance possible to be housed. So yeah, thank you all so much. And I will get this recording out to everybody and it'll be posted on our website shortly.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.